Hey, it's Chuck Armstrong with Loudwire Nights, and this is Loudwire Nights On Demand. It was a blast hanging out with Patrick Carney as we celebrated the release of the Black Keys' new album, Ohio Players. This conversation first aired on Friday night, April 5th. Here you go. Well, 23 years ago, Dan Auerbach and Patrick Carney formed what has become, I would say, one of the most significant rock bands in music today. And I say significant because they've never really worried about fitting into one genre, nice and neat. They've never worried about formulas or expectations. Instead, it seems like they have focused mostly on just making the music they want to make, their own music, call it garage rock, blues rock, whatever you want. And you can hear that over the course of those 23 years, over the course of now 12 studio albums, and album number 12, Ohio Players, is out today and helping us celebrate. That is one half of the Keys, Patrick Carney. Patrick, thanks so much for hanging, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on.
So, right out of the gate, congrats on Ohio Players. As you think about the history you and Dan have, not just going back to 01 when you started the Black Keys, but even back to growing up in the same neighborhood in Ohio, what runs through your head when you hear things like 23 years or 12 studio albums or, on and on? Yeah,
it's wild. I think it was when we crossed that 20-year mark, I wasn't anticipating the way it would make me feel, but it was kind of I was shocked that I had a band that stayed together that long. But I think, it also, I think it sparked something in me, which was like, oh yeah, like how do we enter into our 20 plus year part of our career and not just be, and try to be relevant, try to not be complacent with just what we've accomplished. And I started thinking about, the bands that have made it 20 plus years and like what albums those bands have made that I listened to, and there were not many of those. So I wanted to make one of those. And so
was that kind of shift? Is that what led to Delta Cream, or because
no, that's what led to Ohio Players.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So when we started the album, because we hit our 20-year mark officially from first album, basically the day, like it was like the same day that our last album came out, which was Dropout Boogie. And that's when it kind of started, like, I guess I started like, paying attention to this. And so what it ended up sparking was, the making of this new album and what it required to like make something that I think I wanted it to be able to hang up there with Brothers and El Camino. And we ended up really working very hard on this album. We spent more time in the studio on this record than we did on Brothers, El Camino, and Turn Blue combined. I think we were in the studio like 150 days.
Wow.
So I think, we really put in a lot of time. And so like the whole concept of the record really was like to also do it in collaboration with people who also had these kind of long careers, So we worked with Beck, who's been a big supporter of ours since the beginning and a huge influence of ours since we were in high school. And we met Beck. I met him years and years ago, actually, when I was just a fan, but we went on tour with him 20 years ago. And back then we were, we'd always talk about how it would be fun to make a song together, but it didn't happen until 20 years after that. And so when we started this album, we called Beck to see if he wanted to come in the studio, and it went so well. We ended up writing a ton of stuff with Beck.
And so was he the first call you made when you started making Ohio Players, as far as like co-writers or collaborators? Beck was the first call?
Yeah, because we didn't really have a long list of collaborators, because we were like, we'll just see where we get, but we didn't assume that we were going to get so much stuff with Beck. We wrote like 12 songs with Beck. And the second guy on the list was Noel Gallagher. And, that was a little trickier because we were told kind of quickly that he doesn't really write with other people. and I was golfing with my neighbor in Nashville, John Dittmar, and I was talking to him about how we're trying to get in the studio with Noel Gallagher. And he reminded me that he was Oasis's agent for like 20 years in the US. So I think he reached out, and then, Noel gave us the okay. So we flew to London, and then we wrote, and it was like, looking back on that experience, it was pretty risky. I think we flew all the way to London and went into the studio with Noel, someone who we'd only briefly met before. And, sat down in the room, and we didn't have any songs. So we just wrote a song that day that became a song called You'll Pay. And then we went in the next day and we wrote a song called On the Game. And then the next day we went in and we wrote a song called Only Love Matters. And then we were supposed to work the fourth day, but we just showed up at the studio and we just kind of talked shop for 5 hours together. But like when we were flying home from that, I was like, oh wow, that really worked out. And if it hadn't, I think that would have been really embarrassing to show up in the studio, beg Noel to work, and just not gotten anything worthwhile.
So you guys aren't strangers to co-writing with other people or even having a special guest on a track here or there. Was that the first time that you sort of entered into that process without any sort of songs coming with you, where you just got in and kind of see what happens? Well,
the way that Dan and I make music is 99% of the time is that's how we do it. We start with nothing in a room together and start building something. And when we're producing stuff with other people or writing with other people, that's the process I use. Dan sometimes sits around and does that, but with acoustic guitars and writing, stuff on paper. But for me, it's always been like building with the studio. That was like what got me into making music. Was like I got a 4-track when I was in middle school, 4-track cassette recorder, and on those devices you can record 4 distinct separate things at separate times and combine them. So it's great for like learning how to put music together. And that's always, and I remember the first time Dan came to my house, I had this 4-track and he didn't know what they were. And I showed him how it worked and we made a song. And, I think ever since that day, it kind of, lit a fire in him to like understand the power of what it feels like to make something. And that's always been our kind of priority, was like recording and making something is like what the band is all about. We actually never even played a concert until we'd already finished recording and our first album. It wasn't really a thought. And then the guy that put out our first record, Patrick Boisel at Bomb Records, he called us. He's like, you guys have to play shows or no one's ever going to hear your music. Yeah. And that's when we started, touring. And thank God we did, because it's like the only way you make money, right, as a musician. But the passion is all about the albums, But yeah, I think that the thing is we do have, this is how we work, going to the studio with nothing and starting something. But it's just, we just never do it with like a guy that's like with like rock and roll legends,
Yeah.
That there's just like a little bit more pressure there,
Well, and you talk about Beck, and you guys had a bit of a history with him. You had met him, you toured with him, and so that probably eased the process a little bit too. But then to enter a room with a guy like Noel, who you didn't have any history with, really.
Yeah, I mean, I could kind of, without ever having worked in the studio with Beck, I could, by listening to his albums, I think I could kind of start to understand how the different processes he uses maybe to make his music. And it seemed like we would be able to stumble on something that worked regardless, whether it's writing with him or having a track in the can that he could write to. But with Noel, there is no history of that. There's just these, kind of massive songs. And when Noel talks about them, he's always talking about them in terms of him writing them alone. A lot of times writing them on his 4-track,
So, you talk about golfing and special guests on this album. I got to ask, so there's an interview last year where you talked about, or Dan talked about golfing with Alice Cooper. And I think you were golfing with Alice Cooper and Dan said, yo, Patrick, you got to get him on a track. And, the album's out. I don't think Alice is on any of these tracks. Is that something that ended up happening, or what kind of happened there?
No, there is a song with Alice coming out this year. What happened is from my same neighbor, John, in Nashville. He was Alice Cooper's agent for a very long time. So, and John and I golf. And so I've gotten to play with Alice and John a couple times, which is incredible. But yeah, so to make this record, I know that like bands always say we wrote 100 songs to make this album. We did not make 100 songs. But we did finish about 29 songs. And at one point we thought this was going to be a double album, because it's the only time we've ever had so much material. We were kind of thinking like we should just put it all out just because it's such an impressive amount of stuff. And then I heard a couple records that came out recently that were like 30 tracks long and suck. And I was just like, we don't need to do that. This just put the songs that work best together, because all the songs would work, I think, but together they definitely wouldn't. But the Alice Cooper song is different. It's like a Halloween song. It's called "Stay in Your Grave." So I think we're going to release it closer to the tour. It's going to come out this year. So
awesome.
The tours and the U.S. tours starts in September. So we will have, I guess, we accidentally have a Halloween song already, because Howlin' for You is every Halloween, like the streaming numbers go berserk, because there aren't that many Halloween songs. It's like,
and now you've got one with Alice Cooper, and it doesn't get more Halloween than that.
No, it doesn't get more Halloween than that.
I mean, this is pretty impressive, man. You set out to make a record, to be relevant, right? 20 years later, a significant 20 years later, and you partner with Beck, and you partner with Noel Gallagher. You've got Alice Cooper on a song that came out of these sessions. It's just, you got to feel pretty good as you step back, as you celebrate the release of this album. I guess my question is, do you feel good? Like, do you feel you accomplished that goal that you kind of had in your head about hitting that 20-year mark and wanting to make a record that still sounds relevant for people to hear?
Yeah, the relevant is hard to define clearly, but for some people, relevant is different. For me, the meaning of it is I wanted something that resonates with people who like the type of music we make, and that isn't just deep cuts, fan only stuff. Something that could appeal to people who aren't familiar with the band. The same way a lot of records that introduced me to bands I love did. And yeah, I mean, I think I know how much we worked on it. I know how thoughtful we were about it, and I know it is. I'm very proud of it. It's like you never know what the metrics are of how to label what success is with an album, but I think the best way is to actually perform some songs from it live and see how they go over with the crowd. And the other day we played in Austin, Texas at South by Southwest, and we never do this. We played a song that we've never released in front of a crowd. It's just never been our bag. But we played one of the Noel Gallagher songs on the game, and it was interesting to see like a couple thousand people hearing something that they'd never heard before. Because and it went over, and I was like, that's exciting to think that people are listening to something they've never heard, and because it takes me a couple of times to get to hear a song and start liking it.
Yeah,
it's like I think that's the funny thing about music is that it's like it is. I think it is scientifically proven that the more you hear something, even if you despise it the first time, the more you hear it, the more you get comfortable with it. And then I think there's some sort of paradox where then it becomes like the Macarena, and you just want to rip your ears off. But it does explain why there's so much popular, horrible music. Yeah,
fair enough, man. It's interesting to hear you talk about that South by show, because to think about you being this far into your career and into the life of the Black Keys, and you are still doing new things, right? You writing with Noel Gallagher and Beck and Alice Cooper, and also even this far into your career, trying something you've never tried before, playing a song live before it's ever been released, before anybody hears it. Do you have like a running list of ideas or goals that you want to knock out, or do these things just kind of come up and you're like, all right, this is new, let's do this?
For this album, we had kind of a list of all the things we wanted to check off. Definitely there's a level of strategy, I suppose. We have this documentary that's coming out, and so that's why we went to South by Southwest, because they have the film component, and so we wanted to premiere it. And it felt like the right place to do it, because we could also parlay that into like holding a couple showcases where we could get Dan has a label called Easy Eye Sound, so we basically did 2 showcases and just had basically every Easy Eye artist play the bill with us. But yeah, it's like the main perspective I have now, just I've done this for a while, is just the things that I don't need to do anymore, the things that just that are kind of a waste of time,
Yeah. What's a couple examples?
I mean, a lot of TV stuff is, it's like it'll eat your whole day. It actually costs you money to play like the Tonight Show or something. Like you have to spend like 40 grand to pay the production fees. And it's like you get kind of your arm twisted to get and do this. But I mean, I haven't seen a late night musical performance. It hasn't come across my algorithm in a long time, and if you look at the numbers, like it's just, they're so far down that I don't see the point to that. It's funny because like I see a lot of people telling people like at concerts to put their phones away. And I mean, I do think that's annoying to like, but at the same time, it's like, actually, if you have 1,000 people posting about your concert, it's like you're probably getting way bigger reach than playing like the Tonight Show.
Yeah, for sure, man. Also, it makes me think I gotta start charging for these radio interviews, man.
Yeah, you might. Well, send me your Venmo.
Yeah, I will, man. Last question. You mentioned you guys finished something like 29 tracks for Ohio Players. I think there's 14 on the album out today. We've got the Alice Cooper one coming out sometime this year. Do you have plans or hopes for some of those others that you recorded but didn't include on the track list?
Yeah, we definitely are gonna have a few more songs to put out throughout the year. But there's a lot of the songs that like some of the sadder, kind of more melancholy songs, they just weren't vibing us. They weren't vibing on the record, so I that just wasn't the headspace we were in while making it. And a lot of those songs were written like right at the beginning of the process of making the record. And so the focus shifted. So it just felt kind of out of context. And I don't know, because we have, we have, I don't know if you want to call it an archive or something, but we have, maybe 40 or 60 songs that we finished that we've never released. And it's like, it doesn't really necessarily interest me in revisiting a lot of those songs. Like, I feel like maybe there's some stuff worthwhile for sure. But like I said, the thing that's always gotten Dan and I interested is making something new in the studio. So I'm sure I look at it sometimes like the best thing you can do maybe when you're making a record is just quickly get through the first 10 songs you can think of, because that they might just be like your spring training, knock the dust off, and then you can get into the weeds and find something new. I think that's sort of what happened with this record. We stayed in the studio essentially after we finished Dropout Boogie, and we recorded about 13 or 14 ideas before we started working with Beck. And I don't think any of those ideas made the album. So it was one of those processes like it was good for us to just stay busy and get through any idea that was like easily, coming too easy. We burned it up and moved to a different space.
Patrick Carney, thank you so much for hanging, man. We are celebrating the release of Ohio Players. I know you, in a couple of weeks, you're spending some time in Europe. You're playing the NASCAR Chicago street race in July, which is going to be cool. And then, as you mentioned in this chat, hitting the road in the U.S. Coming up in September. Can't wait for the details on that tour, man. But yeah, man, plenty to celebrate, plenty to come to for this year. So can't wait to see all that's still on the horizon. But we'll have to hang again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
That wraps up this episode of Loudwire Nights on Demand. Stay caught up with everything happening in the world of rock and metal on the Loudwire app and at loudwire.com.